Welcome to this panel on research democratization. My name is Varun. I'll be the moderator for this session. I'll introduce myself, and then I'll go ahead and introduce all of our fantastic panelists here today. So I'm Varun. I usually say Varun 5, Maroon 5, but I don't really like the band anymore. So if you have any cool suggestions on better naming with rhyming with Varun, let me know. Drop it in the chat. I'm the co-founder of Apple Banana, which is a UX research publication, and author of Fruitful, which is a UX research toolkit and library for growing research all over the world. I've been a researcher at Facebook, Best Buy, and SeatGeek. I'm super excited to be here. I'm joined with 3 other panelists who have extensive experience on research democratization. So we're really going to get the inside look on what it actually takes to stand up democratization and make it work for you and your company. So we've got Laura Oxenfeld, Zoe Glas, and Amanda Gelb. We did have a 4th panelist, but she is not feeling well. But feel free to go ahead and connect with her on the Slack group set up by Great Question. So first, we'll start with Laura. In the background looks kind of wintry, kind of like maybe a little cold, but maybe you got a warm glass of coffee with you. So Laura has been in the research field for over a decade, and she has worked at companies like Comcast, Allstate, and Acquia, and is currently the UX research manager at Drift, an AI-based sales and marketing platform. In her role, she runs the product design research and related to the biggest unknowns around the product strategy. And in addition, she's empowered a team of 10 plus designers to run over 50 plus studies on their own in 2022. So that is Laura. We'll jump over to Zoe. Zoe is a UX researcher at Google, working on building tools to keep the world safer. Definitely something that we need. A love of consumer products. She was previously at Lyft and YouTube, and she made a big career switch, and maybe something interesting here, from wildlife biology into tech, and she loves building extra value in research by leveraging diverse backgrounds, democratized and or otherwise. And finally, we have Amanda. Amanda is a research manager at Asana and also professor at NYU. She's committed to making an impact by building community around shared values and is passionate about empowering communities through artful research and strategic planning while using data as a guide for decision-making. And she's also a lifelong question asker and tinkerer. So with that, ask questions. Let's make sure we get the most out of our panelists here. And then Helen is also a UX research manager at Economist. She's not here, but feel free to connect with her in the Slack group after. So with that, we'll jump right into our questions, and we'll go ahead and get started. So our first question, kind of a level set question. Let's everybody ease into the conversation that we've got here. We'll go ahead and start off with Laura. Research democratization, pretty much the name in the game for this entire conference. But what is that? Let's start with you. How do you define that? What comes to your mind?
Yeah, happy to be here. So to me, democratization, I use the word distributed research system more than democratized research, because what I'm trying to do, especially at Drift, is so I have a central research team and we do research, but we want to make sure research is distributed across the product squads. So what I'm doing is enabling anyone that wants to do research, helping them do it. So whether that's a designer, product manager, or someone in a customer facing role. So I want to make sure that they have best practices and quality control for whether it's recruitment, planning, moderating, analyzing data. And also for me, it's any type of research. I know in some places, democratization is only for usability testing or only for other types of research. For me, whether it's discovery, concept validation, usability testing, if you want to do it, I'm here to help you.
Fantastic. Anyone else? Democratization, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I can go next. It's getting as much research as possible to the people that need it, in which it's been validated that research needs to take place. So we get a ton of requests in that can sometimes be overwhelming for us. I've worked in this field for, over 12 years or so, and I have always felt and whatever research or data team that I was on, like there were more requests than we were able to put out. And so this democratization approach is a way for us to vet what is valuable to receive research and then be able to get that to the most amount of people possible.
Yes, I'll round that out. So, I think what both panelists are also getting at is it is a guided process. It is not a free-for-all. And that's definitely a huge part of my practice. It's leveraging teams' existing skills. So I'll be honest, I am not of the boat that anyone and everyone can do research. I think there's a huge percentage of every company that can, but it is still a process that requires training, that requires monitoring, and potentially, and I'll talk about this more in my talk, pulling the plug sometimes. There are people that it's not their bread and butter, just in the way that for some researchers, quant might not be their bread and butter, or qual might not be their bread and butter. So it's leveraging what skill they have, adding on this big dash of training to figure out the best way to gather data and gather insights to create something that is better than would have been there otherwise. It's not a stopgap. I think this is what we often see is we don't have enough research, so let's make PMs do it. I really don't see it as that. I see it as an opportunity to expand the baseline and expand what we're offering to build something more than we would ever be able to do with just researchers, because we have these unique skills. Our PMs have a brilliant way to connect with the leadership in an organization. So they're bringing a new lens to every piece of data they collect and as they deliver to us. So again, it's an expansion rather than a recreation. And ideally, something that creates something pretty darn awesome.
Fantastic. So a lot of different ways of looking at the same word of democratization. But let's pull the thread just a little bit more on this. There is no research oligarchy, right? There is no research autocracy anywhere. It's research democratization, or maybe not. How do you all feel about research democratization? If you were able to rename it, relabel it, Laura, you talked about distributed. Is there any other terms or ways that you want to talk about this research democratization? And people in the comments, do you have a better way of research democratization? Is there a better term or label?
Yeah, I'll hop in and maybe we'll reverse it around. I think one of the big problems with the term research democratization is just how broad it is. And you'll see these posts on LinkedIn all the time that are like, I'm not anti-democratization, but I'm anti anybody doing whatever they want. I'm like, well, I don't think anybody actually defines democratization that way. But I think the real problem with it is democratization sounds like it is something that is happening to research. We are a victim to that democratization versus the leadership and the empowerment of it. So when I think about a term that would better represent what we're actually doing, a big piece of that is ownership. We own it. We lead it. We decide what happens and what doesn't happen. Ideally, we're creating systems that scale, but still at any point able to say, hey, that system doesn't work anymore relative to the way we're using it. Another piece is it focuses on the input, right? Democratization of research, it doesn't focus on the outcome. What is that doing for your team? What is that doing for empathy? What is that doing for your product? I want to hear more about the output versus just what we put in. As researchers, we don't talk a lot about the individual data points. We talk about what comes of it. So what's coming of it? And finally, that research itself and our researchers are rewarded for that leadership. One of the big problems we see with research democratization is people go, hey, I did all this hard work and I have nothing to write on my perf review because I didn't own it. It wasn't mine. But in creating that democratization, your researcher does own it. So it needs to be reflected that it's theirs. It's still their baby. They're not doing the day-to-day potentially, but it's still their responsibility. So when I think about it, I think the term I've kind of come up with, which I'm not super happy with, but is expanding innovation. So it's focusing on that outcome, focusing on the fact that we are driving that expansion into the sphere.
Amanda, well, let's reverse it. Amanda, you can go next.
Sure. Yeah, I think of it as researcher coached, team led. So the coaching is a really huge piece that we've been talking about here, and then the team is leading it. But again, that's happening with real structure and rigor. It's happening with vetting. We're not an ivory tower. Like our discipline is not, we're not for the most part academia, right? This is called people who do research, but if you're in industry right now, it's your job to evangelize. It's your job to share insights. It's your job to make as many partnerships as possible so that your learnings and who you're representing goes further. And with that, we're like the people of the people, if you think about it. And like the more people for me that I can bring into research, that I can help educate and understand what our discipline does and the rigor that we put into how we recruit and how we come up with our questions and what method we pick. And there's so much that happens of research that's behind the scenes that folks don't see. Even if you've shown up to research before as a note taker, or you've sat in on an analysis session, or you've sat in on some workshop or insights or whatever that anyone has shared with you as a researcher, there are 5 million steps behind the scenes as to how all of that was really meticulously done. And so for me, that's not a secret. It's my expertise. I mean, I've earned that expertise with my time and my energy and hard-won lessons. But I'm happy to share those learnings and bring as many people into the process as possible to understand all of those different pieces. And that for me has created more empathy for research, for my discipline. So like democratized research, I agree with Zoe, like it kind of has a bad rep right now online in different forums in the research community. I think that's because it butts into replacing the researcher, or kind of like, this idea that like the researcher isn't in control. But we are supposed to democratize. Like our job as researchers is supposed to represent who we speak to. Like I am not the user, I am not the customer. No researcher is. We're supposed to be as unbiased as possible, which is really hard to do. So as much as we can share those ethos, as much as we can share our process, that's a win to me. So I'm fine with the term with those caveats. Like research democratization should be a really high bar. It shouldn't just be like anyone can do it, whatever. This is just like open to all, like Zoe was saying. So with that caveat, the term can stand as is. And yeah, I like the team-led researcher coached piece of it.
I really like that. Yeah. Laura, how about you?
Yeah, and I do like the term coaching. I use that a lot. I'm here to coach, and it's that interesting fine line. You mentioned there's no research autocracy. I do feel like sometimes the scalable systems I put into place, to some people, they do feel a bit like an autocracy, because we at Drift, we hire designers that are killer researchers. They're really great researchers already. And it's in our career ladder as well. If you want to keep getting promoted, you have to, have evidence that you're a good researcher as well. So there is a bit of that friction when, if I am trying to support 19 squads with a lot of designers, some of the stuff the quality control things that I put in place can feel give not the best vibe sometime. But yeah, it's that balance of coaching and enabling and empowering. The other reason I like the term distributed research, and I was talking about it before, but so at Drift and other places I've worked, there's a central research team, and I'm not in a product squad, and then there's the designers that are embedded in squads. So the problem that as a central research model I run into time and time again is the people that are involved in the research, they embody it the best. We as researchers, we do our best to analyze, tell the story, get the data and the insights out there. But if people just consume research one time in a readout, it's their first time getting hands-on with any of that. So I think it's more effective for the research to be distributed into the squads, because I'm not in the Slack channels, in the stand-ups, in the rituals. The people in the squads are. So I think it's most effective to have, my thoughts are, how can I make other people so good at research that my team is no longer necessary? So that's my philosophy. Distribute high quality research into the squad so that they're there to advocate for the users in a way that me and my team never could be, because we're not in the teams.
So there you go. 3 different ways to think about democratization. Right in.
Yeah. I just want to add something really quick that I loved in Laura. It's like, designers used to be expected to do usability research. I think it was Lawton Playbus that just put out an article on this, but correct me if I'm wrong, someone in the chat. But even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, the baseline expectation was designers did usability. And that's really shifted away. We're now in this point where, no, we don't really have that, and that's more separate. But it's really showing our industry changes constantly. And we're in this moment right now where we're saying, well, how does research going to change? How is research going to expand? This thing that, as a formalized UX research discipline, yes, it came from other established disciplines, has only been around for 15, 20 years. We have a lot to learn and do differently. I think democratization right now feels really scary because change is scary. Everyone has change aversion. That's one of our favorite terms as researchers. But there's just as much potential to change again and go back to leveraging designers for usability research, for even foundational research if the timing is right and the support is there. So I love that Laura just reflected on that. Like, things change. Let's be a part of it. Let's lead it.
Change, loss aversion, right? Change aversion. We've all said it. You've definitely thought about that in your reports. So, all right, we'll jump into our next question here. This is open for anyone, and we can jump start. Can you talk about the training that's required to help democratize research? Is there a session? Is there something that you get started to get the ball rolling? And what is that?
So at Drift, I know there's a lot of resources credible resources out there, but both at Drift and other places I've worked, it's helpful to make your internal wikis, even if you're doing like copy pasta and linking to the source, but having internal wikis that are basically plug and play templates for the different types of research, for recruitment. So yeah, I think if you think of like research as planning, recruitment, moderation, analysis, having resources for all of that, and also doing in-person trainings and one-on-one sessions, observation, feedback, doing all that while also balancing doing research on your own too.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think of it as a couple phases. Before I let anyone really start with democratized research, a big piece of it for me is non-bias training, understanding the risk of research, and respecting your user. So what does that actually mean? We have all been in that situation, I think, where somebody is listening into a session and they pop in with a question that maybe is really leading. Maybe, unfortunately, is really racist or sexist. And you're like, oh God, and my alert goes through the roof and you don't know how to pull that plug. Those are the pieces that I'm like, hey, you're going to go through your company's, all of their non-bias trainings first. Hopefully there's a couple of them. And that might not be research specific to everyone, but for me, it's very research specific. So like, make sure you're a good human, you know what you can talk about. Then a couple of things, and I'll talk about this more in my talk later today, like hypothesis testing, which is something I think we forget a lot, but we see a lot with our partners, especially is they say, well, I want to test and see if my idea is a good one. And what they're saying is the connection between A and B good? And maybe it is, but maybe A and C would have been better, or A and Z would have even been best. So how do we help you generate those pieces? And then finally, the specific templates or things that you're testing. So for example, I'm working on some work right now on how do we test content? How do we make sure people can understand really technical documentation? It is templatized out the wazoo. Like, do this, share this document with this person. There's still a lot left to the person, of course, of how do they interpret that data and present that data. But for me, that's really the final step. Set them up, make sure they know what they're doing first. And that even if you do have to pull the plug or something goes wrong, they know why. You can say, hey, we talked about this. This is not appropriate. And you can step away. And I'm really excited to hear Amanda's answer because she's done so much great work on this when we were together at Lyft.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, I won't give up too much away from my talk, which is going to go into detail on this, but the most important template for me is the intake form. So before anyone gets to do any democratized research, they need to fill out a form for me explaining what they want to learn, who they want to learn it with, what stage are things in? Is it a wireframe? Is it like a wacky idea you had? Is it a hackathon thing? Is it like something that you built but never got testing? What's your hypothesis? How certain are you that it's true? There's a series of questions, and that is a really lovely bit of friction. I like to insert friction into this process. And then like, if you're able to overcome that, that means you really intentionally want to do research in the right way. So that for some teams is like a deterrent enough to say like, oh, we don't actually want to go through this process. We're not going to fill out the form. I'm not forcing them to fill that out. So that's the most important thing for me. And then from there, I've got all this really wonderful data, right? So like now I'm like, oh, you have this question. That should be a experiment. Let's talk to the data science team about that. Like, here's a connection. Let's go talk to them together. Or like, oh, this is actually a really foundational, big strategic question. Like, democratized research in the way that we're running it, you know, at various companies, likely not going to help you answer that. So like, let's either make a bite-sized portion of that question and chunk that out, or as the researcher, I would love to answer that. Let me figure out how I can add it to my roadmap for what that is. So it's a really good way also to see who wants what research and how much of that research is well suited for the democratized research program that we've set up, which is often very specific, right? So that's thing one. Thing two is I have templates for discussion guides, for how to ask questions, for note taking. I have this for my own note takers. If you're taking any notes for me on any research I'm ever conducting, I have some, you know, tips at the top for you. I created a moderator training called Moderate Like a Boss, just like a moderation 101. And if you're, this is when I was at Lyft, I was really clear, like you had to do this training to participate in the program, and it was live. You couldn't make it up online. You couldn't watch a video. And it was a 30 to 40 minute training, and everyone did it. Like I have VPs of engineering who have taken it. I have technical product managers, like across the board, like from executive down to interns, like everyone should learn how to moderate first before you jump in and sit in front of folks. And that training also has folks practice practice with leading questions and non-leading questions. So again, like the beauty of democratized research to me is that we're putting our partners in the driver's seat. We're letting them talk to our customers face to face. They need to be really prepared to do that. Asking questions is actually really hard. So I make sure that training is in place also, which is something, again, I've templatized for myself and now give pretty easily.
And to build off both Zoe and Amanda, the intake, I think, is super important as well, because research looks like a conversation. They're like, oh, I can just hop on customer calls, but sitting down and thinking through what are your learning objectives, what are you going to do with this, so I mentioned having a central research function, having people sit down and think through the why and the plan behind it, not only helps them, really think through what's the seed of what we're trying to get at, what are assumptions that we're, trying to validate or invalidate in an unbiased way, but also so people do their plan, their mod guide, and then share it in the research Slack channel for the central research team for visibility, because it is a distributed research team. So we don't want people redoing stuff that we already have answers for. So I think having a central function makes democratization work more efficiently. But then also for feedback, just like how Amanda said, oh, I see you want to figure out this, that would be a good experiment, or data science, or this and that. So the research team, as professional researchers, we have stronger expertise in matching questions to methods that other people might not have. So I think it's really important, make them think about the why. They can pick a method, and if you have to change it, that's fine. But making sure to share to a centralized function is super important. And it's also not just the central research team that has eyes and feedback on this. Like the designers and PMs all give great, drop great comments on this. And it's also a place where, so we're trying to move more into the triad function, where it's the tech lead, the PM, and the design lead doing, continuous discovery. So I think getting engineers more aware too of, what are we researching and why, and they can get more involved. So sharing your plans in a public Slack channel just, creates more visibility for the squad as well as the central function.
Laura, you said something earlier that I want to just highlight for folks listening, which is that you're chatting with teams also about how they're going to be using this. Yeah. So I won't do research anymore unless the team has a clear plan for how they're going to act on what we learn, which is something I've come to with my own confidence in, my skill set and team trust and all of that kind of thing. But I think we've also so unfortunately felt that we do research and it just sits on a shelf, or it's too late, or there's no designer, engineer, anyone, the team's kind of moved on, and research was just that validation check mark. And so for democratized research too, right? Like we have these standards, we have these principles that we should be living by as researchers, as practitioners. That applies to democratized research as well. So every team that I work with, I'll say like, okay, what are you going to learn? And like, what time do you have reserved to make these changes? And if it's like, ooh, we just want to understand that we got this thing and we're like moving on, or the thing shipped or whatever it is, then like they're less of a contender to participate in this program.
Yeah, and adding to that, I have a slide that literally says, we want to validate. There's a big line that crosses through it and says, no, I don't validate. We don't validate. That's not a thing. We need to be open to all of these alternates. And even plussing onto Amanda is if saying like, how are you going to use this? And I'm like, well, we're going to use it to inform this. Great. What if you're wrong? Then what are you going to do? What specifically are you going to do if you're wrong? And if they're like, well, ooh, I don't know, I think we still have to move forward with this. I'm like, that's so awesome. We won't be doing research on it. We have better things to use with our time. And it also gets a lot more respect for research, right? And even if they do go through it and don't use it, and you're like, hey, you just wasted 3 weeks. Was that the right call? Do you want to reevaluate? Don't be afraid to really push on people, right? We want our babies to grow, and they want their project babies to grow. Like, push on things.
Yeah, I do want to touch on validation, which both of you have brought up a couple of times. So I am talking right after this about how to make concept validation credible and unbiased. So I'm sure, I'm not the only one that people are always like, go validate this. That is so loaded, so biased, but there is a way to turn that into a fruitful exercise. But it can be very dangerous as well if you're just, this is a good idea, right? Now I have data that says it's great.
Lots of great conversation happening here. And then in the comments, I want to call out one question that came in that I think would be nice to get everyone's perspective on. What problems is research democratization trying to solve? How do you know that, hey, of all the grab bag methods and templates and resources, maybe you want to grab for research democratization type efforts over something else? What stands out?
Yeah, I guess I'll kick off because I think I can be pretty quick here. It could solve just about anything. It depends on what your team needs and where they're headed. Also, your time is limited and democratization takes time. Building those templates takes time, editing, testing, delving, all of those things are pieces that you cannot do everything. So could democratization eventually be leveraged through ChatGPT in some crazy way? Yeah, sure. But right now, you're going to step one step forward. Usually that's like usability testing, content testing, something relatively simple. And then just as you do with every other project, following your impact, right? Which is going to be the most impactful for me to chase down now. When I think about it and what's going to be democratized, it's what's the skill of my team? What's my bandwidth and skill in supporting them in doing that? Am I so confident that I can lead someone? And what does the company actually need right now? Right? Research is great, but can take a tiny step or a big leap. Always lean into those big leaps. So for me right now, it's content testing. There's a ton of it that my org needs to do. And I can't do it all myself, and it's not really the best use of my time or of the people that work with me's time, the immediate researchers around me. And we do have this great skill to test and leverage this with our UX writing department, with our product people. Next year, it might be something totally different. So follow the impact in what you're doing.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, how I've led it in the past, it's been to scale myself. Like there's just been way too much demand, and a demand with really great questions with people that, you know, really do want to understand more about the product that has not been explored in a particular way. And so, you know, it takes the same amount of time to recruit, takes the same amount of time to write a discussion guide, meet with teams or whatever. It could take me a month to work on one project. Whereas if I'm training and up-leveling 6 teams, which is like the chunks that I do, you know, democratize research in, those 6 teams could have a little bit of insights on what they're trying to learn in that same month. So just from a pure scale perspective, that's pretty incredible. And then again, it's not a one and done. I just want to, not related to the question, but we haven't brought this up also. Like often we learn something in, you know, the democratized research, and then like I go off and explore it further as the researcher, or the team goes back to the drawing board and comes up with something else. And the next round of democratized research, we try it out. And so again, like everything, we're in a product development cycle. We're learning, we're experimenting, we're growing, we're changing. It's democratized research, both as the programs we're talking about here and the learnings are not meant to be like existing in a box and then that's it and we all move on, hopefully. So yeah, scaling myself, a really amazing need for how I've leveraged it personally. And then the evangelization education piece, again, like research is such a, I'm biased because I'm a researcher, but we're such an amazing discipline and it's so nuanced in terms of what we do. Like I was saying earlier, all of those different steps. And so as much as I can pull back the curtain and invite my teams in, that's created so much respect for my discipline and for me. That has created so much empathy for like, oh, Amanda, like we know you're doing so many things because you're working on this one study right now. So like you let us know if you have bandwidth for this. Like the conversation has shifted in how people are requesting my time as a researcher because they've gone through this program.
Yeah, and the problems that distributed research that we're trying to solve at Drift is, of course, you know, specific to Drift's situation. So, you know, I was saying before, research has more impact if it's done within the product team because people are more engaged. They know, you know, they did it. They're the ones creating the insights. But the other problem is trying to solve. So Drift is a bit in flux right now. We have a new SVP of product, and you know, what his vision for central research is we should, you know, me and my team, we should be doing research on things that are 6 to 12 months down the line. And then all of the research, whether it's discovery, concept validation, or usability testing, or, you know, always on usage and satisfaction research, that should be done at the product level. So, you know, yeah, so a lot of change going on right now. And so part of the democratization very much lies in central research really, really needs a team of great researchers in the squads. And we also need a scalable recruitment solution. So before we had a human being that did the research recruitment, we did find Great Question, and now that role got eliminated. And through Great Question, we're able to distribute the recruitment across these like 19 squads without double tapping customers. So I think it's not only the problems we're trying to solve is future research is done at this, and like strategic cross squad research is done by the professional researchers. And then the nearer term research is done within the squads. So everyone needs to be a pretty stellar researcher, and we need to be able to recruit pretty easily.
Yeah, sorry. I'm loving, I think, every bit of this. I think over and over, we're really hammering on like leverage the skill that you have and best use your skill. And even Thea Hogarth put a comment in that said, "Are you empowered to make that decision?" That's a sales question. Salespeople ask this all the time. Hey, we've got this great thing. Are you empowered to make the buying decision? There is brilliance in your organization everywhere. Leverage it, right? And reflect on your own brilliance. Is your own brilliance every day best spent doing usability testing? If you're just starting out, yes, probably. But if you're 3 or 4 years in and you know where the organization should go, that's time. That's still 40 hours that you're going to take running through that piece. And I used to run usability tests kicking off Monday and delivering Friday, and it was stressful, and I made it happen. Could I continue to do that? Yeah. Is that the best use of my time? No. There's other brilliant people that I can leverage in a safe and reduced risk way to still get those data. So I think democratization, remember, it's also about valuing yourself. As Laura pointed out, what's the 6 to 12 month? What's the product direction I'm going to shape? That's a heck of a lot cooler than the little pieces that you're kind of handing off.
One more thing that we haven't quite touched on, but I'm seeing show up in the chat here with perhaps what's behind some of these questions is like showing your impact or showing how this democratized research as a program or how you're running it at various companies makes any difference. And we'll often send a survey to teams, you know, like a few months out saying like, what changes did you make? How helpful or not helpful was that? And that's helpful for us as a program, but that also is really, really impactful when we're thinking about how this program has influenced actual product change on the ground. And often, unfortunately, I feel like similar to teachers, like maybe your 3rd grade teacher really influenced your life, but you only realized that when you were 20 years old. Like research sometimes has that same effect where like people are still looking at your decks or your docs or whatever it is, like even, you know, a few years out, but you don't know who that person is or how they found it. And the idea of impact as a researcher can be a little fuzzy, but we are able, and we should all be empowered, whoever's on this call, to be able to check in with our partners with whatever research you're doing, democratized or not, and see what changed as a result of it. How helpful really was it, you know, looking back a few months or whatever it is. And that can help us evolve the processes that we're creating to better suit your organizations.
Yeah, and one thing we do for, insights, what difference did this make? So my researcher, Sierra, she went through, summarized all the research in 2022, which ended up being 59 studies across all the designers, PMs, and my team. So summarizing that, seeing what are the biggest trends, and out of those biggest trends, comparing the release notes throughout all of 2022 to see, have we released product that addresses these pain points, and anything that has not been addressed or what we put out did not fix the problem. We are bringing that to the new SVP of product and head of design and whatnot. So we don't have like results of that process yet, but that is one thing that we're trying. Another thing that we're trying, so I recently did a big research project related to churn. So if customers do leave Drift, what are the qualitative themes there? And I'm developing an always on research program. So if another customer does churn, are there new things coming up, or, how does the pattern get stronger or weaker? And then same thing, we'll compare it to release notes. So that's not like user research like traditionally, but it's using research skills to connect. Basically these are unmet needs of existing customers. They leave because something went wrong. And then is the product that we're shipping actually making a difference, 3 months, 6 months down the line?
Seems like we're liking the comparing of research insights with release notes as a way of connecting research to design to release, which is nice. So we'll jump into another question here from the chat. a lot of distribution, right? Distributed research using what Laura said. How do you extract insights across all of the players involved in distributed and democratized research? How do you synthesize into a clear, cohesive viewpoint? Is that the goal? Is that even possible? We'd love to know.
Yeah, for me, that goes back to templates. So I used to have a one-pager that folks needed to fill out within a few days of completing it. And it was like, what are some things that surprised you? What are 3 quotes that stood out? What are some changes you are considering making as a result of what you learned? And then the team and I would huddle and talk about, how true those were. I found that synthesis is actually really hard, which makes sense. Like that's a large part of our expertise. So we can mostly collect data and try to be unbiased and all of those kinds of things. But in detecting patterns and putting those things together, that's where teams need more of my help. So I'll sometimes work with the teams in crafting those insights that come out of the synthesis. For rapid research, we evolved from the one-pager to a 4-slide deck, and we'll do a lunch and learn. That's what we did at Lyft for a number of years. And so because there are so many different teams across different orgs that are participating, it isn't really like everything gets bubbled up into this one major theme per se, though I love that idea. I think we could easily research trust, or I don't know, some of these larger issues that many companies are always going against. Let's do research on loyalty, and here are a few different experiments and tests that we could do to bubble that up. But for the most part, they're sort of unconnected insights, but we bring all of the different teams that participated together for this lunch and learn, and they all share their deck with each other and with their larger team, right? So like the most people that participate, you may have like a really eager PM and perhaps an engineer that's with you, but they have this likely whole engineering pod that they're working with, and we encourage those teams and all of those cross-functional partners to come with and listen to the insights and have a conversation afterwards as a team as a result of that. So for us, it's concretizing it in a really clear way for the team so that deck lives on and can be shared, but then it's also the what comes next, right? Like here's the insights that we learned, here are some findings, and now as a larger team, let's ingest them together and talk about how that all works, how we act on that.
Yeah, I love this. I think about this templatization on a couple of scales, and one to Amanda's point is like there is a deck that is expected. One of the problems with teams is they go, well, I found the thing I did and I'm going to run with it. And you're like, that's data collection. That's not research. I need you to think it all the way through, bring it together, and really think, is this what I'm proud of standing behind versus, oh, I proved it and I'm good, and I can kind of hide by the fact that it was never developed. But you can also think of this templatization at really small scales. So something that I did early in my career, thanks to a manager named Rochelle Edwards, absolutely amazing. If you ever get a chance to work with her, please do. And she would have us go through our decks and put blue keys, which meant like brilliant insight, something that's beyond the scope of that project that you want to keep in mind. And then red, yellow, and green, right? This thing is so bad that it needs to be fixed before this is launched, or everything's going to go haywire. That's a red. Green, this is going really well. Hey, designer, pat yourself on the back. You can go through those and pull all the blue keys. And I would do that once a quarter and say, what are all the blue keys that we found across all of these different studies? And at that point, it was a team that had 7 different researchers doing different kinds of rapid research every week. So there were a lot of blue keys that you could go through and say, oh gosh, there's something here around a critical user journey we're not touching on, or there's something here around trust. But bringing those together in a way that makes it really easy to find that stuff, set yourself up for success in the future, is a great way to do it. Another piece of this is a research archive. Google has a brilliant one that some engineer made for us, and I'm endlessly grateful for them. But develop some kind of archive, please, even if you're a researcher of one. And that should have things like the title, the link to the report, why you asked that question, maybe 1 or 2 things about the decisions that were made based on it, and a couple of the really key insights that someone can read before they even jump in, right? And then that research actually does get to live on, and you can find it later. Ideally, this becomes something that is searchable. Google Drive has some great functions for that. There are brilliant companies that are doing a way better job of this than Google Drive ever could. But please look into those, make sure you have some sort of archive so you can go back and get at those. It is worth the investment. Please don't wait 6 years before you invest in a research archive. It'll be a huge piece of your democratization practice and your research practice overall.
Yeah, to +1 to Zoe, research archive. And that can, yeah, like Zoe said, be as simple as a list. I have a wiki page where it's just, similar to the info that Zoe was mentioning. And, having this central research function. So another part of my job is I sling slides, right? So since I'm on a, mid-level leadership at Drift. I'm in a lot of cross-squad meetings. And so, I know, so I think part of central research is we need to know everything that everyone has learned, because our org is small enough where central research can do that, so that any meeting I'm in, I can deep link people to the slide, or, if I can't deep link it, it's the whole slide deck, but I am sending other people's research out all the time. So having that archive makes it possible, but then also when there's a new hire, like we got a new hire a couple weeks ago, and I went through like 2 years of research archive, and I customized a list, and like, here's all the stuff that you need to go through, or should go through. So I think, that having the archive there, but having a central research function, just knowing, so that you can sling the slides whenever possible. And again, it's not just the research I did or my research team. It's whether it's a PM designer or if a tech lead does it. I don't care if you're a human with a pulse, you did research, I will sling your insights. The other way we distribute the insights, which this is, another reason I like distributed research, that if you're in the squad, you already have those times, those forums to have the conversations. In central research, we do struggle a little bit in getting the insights out there. So, we'll schedule a readout, which is kind of hard because we figure out things that is relevant to 3 squads. And so that's like 25 people. There's no way to get the time on the calendar for 25 people. So we try to schedule our readouts a couple weeks ahead of time, and that's a good deadline. But so at Drift, we have a video product. So we have a big video culture. We all feel like we run YouTube channels. So we record it, we post it, but people at Drift do tend to watch videos if they miss meetings. We've also been experimenting with, if you didn't make the full hour readout plus discussion, then let's record, here's a 15-minute section, a 15-minute section. And we do see higher engagement with these shorter clips. The other thing is we have a Slack channel called Product Work in Progress. And so people will share designs in products, one in progress, one pagers in progress. But that's also where we will share the research plans and the research readouts. So, and then we'll tag people or entire product squads where it's like, this research has relevance to this other squad, even though, we didn't know it ahead of time. And then finally, the research. So aggregating insights across studies. Sierra has been doing the research audit process. I don't know how repeatable, or how scalable that is, but, going through everyone's research with a fine-tooth comb, seeing the top themes, and just keeping that up over time. I know some repositories, you can do these bite-sized insights, but I think that makes sense for a smaller research project. But at the scale of research that I do, I need that slide deck. I need to be, or a wiki page or a big Miro board. I need to be able to put all these insights together in a way that the story makes sense, the impact on the product is shown. So that was a lot of talking, but that's how I distribute insights and do the cross-study synthesis.
That was great. People are here for the talking, so I think there's a lot of fun out of that. So one thing that I've heard a bunch of times today is the templification. I don't know if that's the word, but that sounds like a great word. Templates. The question here is, how do you use the templates properly? How do you stop them from being changed? How do you stop them from being misinterpreted or shared to parties that maybe have not done bias training or been trained to use it effectively? How to use them to make democratization easier, scalable, and kind of replicate yourself, Amanda, you talked about, kind of making your time even better in that way, templates. So.
Yeah, I run the program. So the templates can be shared, but if you want to talk to real customers, you got to go through me. You can't just reach out directly. There's no system to do that. So I kind of hold power there because I hold, the customers or the users, whoever it is you're trying to contact. And if you want to be part of this program, I'm really clear upfront about my responsibilities, the team's responsibilities, and one thing that we share. So I have everyone kind of verbally agree that this is the timeline we're on and this is what's needed from everyone and here's how it's all going to go. So it's not a surprise when I'm like, hey, I want to know your research goals. And they're like, oh, we don't have any. So all of that is really fine-tuned and clear and upfront. I think that the upfront piece is the trick of it, just repeating yourself. It's when you're supposed to give a speech, it's state what you're going to say, state what you said, and state why you said it. It's I do that repeatedly with every template that I share, with the entire process. Here's where we are in the process. We've gone through this template. You have these questions. Here's what's going to come next. I'm going to be doing the recruit. Here's what a general population recruit looks like. Next step, we're going to do this. So everyone is really clear on where they are, in our like user journey together, our democratized research journey together. And then I'm there. Like I also like, I don't know, I was definitely more hands-on in the early days. And then there's this really lovely inverse effect that happens, or like you have these people that become almost like trusted semi-researchers themselves. I make it really clear that no one's a researcher, I'm the researcher. And like once people go through this program again, they're like, oh wow, we like have a lot of respect for research. We don't think that we're a professional question asker per se, or person who does research. But I'm there kind of hand-holding new teams or folks who haven't done this before, and not just with the in-person training and practice, but I make sure that everyone has a dry run before they speak to our customers. I make it like there's certain things in place to try create practice for everyone and a high bar. And then, I kind of like trust people as they've gone through the program a few times. So if you've done this a few times with me, then you can like maybe suggest a method and I'll be like, oh, that's maybe not good. This is good. And I won't say it in those words, but I work with everyone to make sure that we're crafting the best questions, to make sure that the method they've selected is correctly. And then I put the work back on them, but they're all of these personal checks I have for myself for quality as we go through those different stages together.
Yeah, I think a piece of that, Varun, just to push back on the question, there was this like, well, but what if they haven't done that training? Well, for me, that's where the boundary is. You do that training and then you have access to this resources. And a big piece of democratization, and I know I've alluded to this, but please come to the talk later, I'll talk about this more, is what that risk factor is, right? And if that risk factor is really high, don't do the research. You decide where that risk factor is. You're going to have teammates that you're like, damn, I actually totally trust this person. They've got a great sense of it. I have a person like that. His name's Filippo. He's brilliant. If he wanted to be a researcher tomorrow, he could. A lot of people aren't that way. You're going to, just as you do with your friends and family, determine where there's trust is and what you can push on and what you can't. But you need to proactively set those boundaries. That is a proactive, not a reactive, right? If things are going wrong and then they're like, oh, shoot, I should never have let you do that. That's okay. But proactively say, hey, I just learned that this is not appropriate. Moving forward, this is the boundary and this is why that boundary is there. So reduce that risk to a level that you are comfortable with. One of the reasons we talk about templates a lot, it's a great way to reduce risk. Is it the only way to do this research? Absolutely not. I don't use templates for usability research. I think usability research is pretty straightforward. And to me, it boils down to about 3 questions. Happy to talk about that offline. But that's all I set them up with, is like, this is what it is. These are the limits of what can come of this research. As researchers, we almost always have a sprinkling of foundational or concept testing within our usability. That's not actually usability. That's something that you have that expertise to push on. If I'm enabling usability, that's it. Is it usable? Can they find it? Can they tap it? Can they do it? Set those limits for yourself and enforce those limits, right? This is what we do. For me, that will always involve non-response bias training, right? Like, how do we make sure that our users are safe and our employees are safe, that people are spoken to and respected in a way that allows them to do their best work, whoever they're talking to. But set those boundaries for yourself.
And so related to templates, I'll go back to how we encourage people to share their plan and their mod guide in the Slack channel for visibility and feedback. Before I had a lever, which was recruitment, where it's like, if you want to do research, you're going to have evidence of a well thought through plan and then share it for visibility and feedback. And also, like, I share my plans for visibility and feedback. Like, I don't get my plans right all the time, or my mod guides. So I think, there's the template, and I do see that people will sometimes just straight up copy pasta the template. Other times people write it from scratch, and maybe we'll have a question or two in there. And I think the templates are helpful for me too, as I'm giving feedback. There's a lot going on in everyone's lives. So like having, the template here as I'm reviewing their plan side by side is helpful as well. But then, so going back to recruitment used to be my lever. Because Drift is undergoing change right now, I guess I'm interested to hear, both Amanda and Zoe, so at Drift, our number one leadership principle is put the customer at the center of everything you do. So in the early days of Drift, people did support calls. So you were everyone at the company was engaging with the customer. And, now PMs are always expected to be on weekly calls. And so weekly calls with customers. So they're, as we're empowering the squads more and more, like there's that line, what's an ad hoc conversation? What is a research study? And now that we're distributing recruitment out to the squads too, it's like, I have less control over, I don't have that lever of recruitment to ensure quality. So I don't have answers there, but it does feel like, if you hold the keys for recruitment, you can really quality control the research system. And if you don't, then it's a little more loosey-goosey.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing point. And it goes to Amy Geller's question, how about people doing research at the company, not using your programmers' researches? Not everyone's doing research. Some people are asking questions. Some people are learning. That's not research. And there's a big difference between learning and research. It has to do with developing those insights that Amanda spoke to, synthesizing, telling a great story, leading direction. You will be in meetings and they will say, well, we talked to customer and we did this research. That's a great time to be like, hey, it sounds like you did some really cool learning. That's actually not research as our company defines it. That's another boundary you can set, right? Not everybody's going to be doing it, but also people love support. So reaching out to those people and saying, hey, it sounds like you did some learning and that you're interested in making that into research. Let's chat about some strategies that we can leverage to make that happen. And again, you're putting yourself in that proactive seat. But also, again, don't be afraid to say, that's not research, especially if it bubbles up to high levels. And I've been in this position where they'll be like, well, we were researching data, and they talked to like 3 experts that were friends of the CEO. Cool, not research, right? Learnings.
I want to not push back, but I want to ask more about that, Zoe, because you're a senior UX researcher at Google, right? So that comes with a certain level of clout and brand, and that's awesome. But what if you're not a senior researcher? What if you're not at the Google? What if this is your first role? How do you have any guidance or tips for, sorry, I'm putting the foot down politely. I'm establishing credibility and boundaries, but also making it permeable for you to join the conversation. Any strategies in that frame, in that light?
Yeah. One, I love this question in a couple of ways. One, because it gives me the opportunity to say Google's like any other company. Yes, it's weirdly hard to get in. I do mentorship if you want to talk about getting in, but it has its wonderfulness and its flaws like anybody else. If you meet someone who says that the sun shines out the rear because they work at Google, Meta, Microsoft, et cetera, I promise it doesn't. They're the most brilliant researchers I've ever worked with, work at often very, very small companies because they love that impact and that ability to lead. Not to say I don't work with brilliant people, but tech is silly, right? It's like just because you went to Harvard doesn't mean you're cool. I went to the University of Montana. I studied bears. So do whatever you want. Don't be subject to other people's like cool girl, cool boy piece. Now, how do you push back? Here's the thing. I love to argue. Culturally, I love to argue. Debate is one of my faves. So I've never had too much of a problem pushing back. Books, thanks for the feedback. Amazing one at how you can push back and say no and also take and receive feedback better and not be shut down by it. But how do you say no? Saying no is a skill. It is to be practiced. Say it in the way that works for you. My favorite is actually never to say no. It's to say yes and. Yes, we could do that, and it's a terrible idea. Here's why. A little bit of a joke there, but like push on things in a way that's comfortable for you and find your piece. You are brilliant. If you are a researcher in any of these companies driving things forward, you got there. You worked really hard to get there. You learned a lot of things. Own that, right? That is yours. And I am not about to say something about like imposter syndrome. There's a lot of data that's not even a real thing and disproportionately affects women and minorities. HBR just put an article about this. Please go read it. But practice that skill. The more boundaries you can set in advance, the better. And be generous with those. Be in your face about those. I have the top of documents sometimes that say like, this is a democratized research. What is it? What's the scope? How far can you take it? Set those the way that you want. And again, push on things. If you're struggling, reach out to other brilliant people. While I was at Lyft, I had the wonderfulness of having Amanda a couple levels ahead of me who could say, hey, I think this thing could go a little bit differently. Here's another way to think about that. Find your people that will help you with that no or help you with those boundaries.
There's also something here about like the existentialness of what research is and how it works in companies, right? Like how we're defined. Like I've been part of conversations where like we should rebrand research. We're not research, we're insights, or we're strategic partners, or like research always wants to play in a few different spaces. So I think part of it is just that like sometimes we're established, we exist at companies. Yes, we're new, to Zoe's point, and we have this opportunity to innovate now that we have established teams and we have research leaders and roles opening up and people who are, I want to see a chief research officer. That's like my next goal for our discipline. But we're there. We're at these big companies. We're at these smaller companies. Yes. But how we're perceived and what our impact is, I think, is also still a little bit wishy-washy. And so sometimes, like Zoe was saying, it's pushing back in these conversations that you're having one-on-one or with teams. And sometimes it's thinking about organizationally how you're structuring research. And that may require a roadshow or some demos or lunch and learns or conversations with the executive team. Like, hey, we had a conversation as a research team. Even if your research team is 2 people, if you're one person, you're still a research team. Like you're the torchbearer of our discipline wherever you're working. Like, this is what we do. This is what we don't do. And being able to share that on a broader company-wide level across your pillars or orgs or however you're organized is really, really important too, so that you're then asked for the right things and you can start to change that language and that terminology. And that happens on a broader scale. Like I think the pushback and the dialogue works best in the one-on-one conversations, and we have a lot more leverage there. And that can be easier, and it's easier to have more confidence to step into those. But then there's how we're representing our discipline and what research really is as well for your organization, for your company.
Yeah, and I'm going to yes and that. Yes, push back and think about how you do it, because social capital is important. And maybe like Zoe, I think I have a similar personality. And at Drift, I came in really strong and was like, oh my goodness, like they're calling, 2 ad hoc calls like research. And, I was being a little too forceful too quickly before I built relationships and understood that, people at Drift are fiercely independent and autonomous, like their teams are fiercely autonomous, and put the customer at the center of everything you do has been like the part of the DNA of Drift from the beginning, from the founders, which is why it's a very research friendly place. So I had to figure out how to not come in on an ivory tower, meet people where they are, and have the philosophy of like, if you want to learn how to level up, I'm going to help you. If you want to continue doing it the way you're doing it, like I'm not here to make people feel bad about like things. So it is that fine line. But someone I think mentioned, if your earlier career, how do you do that? I think you catch more flies with honey. And I like, Amanda, your recommendation of having the smaller group conversations or one-on-ones, and also don't point them to your own like wikis or whatnot. Send them references of like credible sources and outlets. So it's not, if you are early career, it's not you saying it, it's someone else saying it that is, world renowned. So although people should listen to you regardless of, where you are at in your career.
Yeah, I love that. And the honey bit in specific, I think we have this default, and research is predominantly a female-driven field right now, but we have this sense that like sweetness is default. See, sweetness is backing. It's not. Honesty is sweetness. Like directness is sweetness. Understanding where people are and helping them figure out the best way to move forward is sweetness. So your brilliance is a type of sweetness. And I think really to Laura's point, like so much of what we talked about today is the lovely 30% of what we get to do, which is the research. And the other 70% is influencing and understanding where people are coming from. Researching your stakeholders. I am constantly trying to understand what biases do they have? What hypotheses do they have? That person who's been here for 7 years knows a lot. Why is he pushing back? Oh, it didn't work last time. Well, what's different? How do I help him understand or see what could be different about the opportunity now? So don't forget that that's a big piece of it, and that your research is just one very influential piece, but just one piece of it driving it forward.
I believe, Laura, you might have to drop off and get ready for your talk. So if you want to say any final words, any final sentences here before you jump off.
I think my final thought that we haven't touched on is, when I started in research, it was the ivory tower. People, like designers, wanted to do research, and we were gatekeepers. We said, no, you're not a researcher. I am that special enlightened one that can do this. And me and my manager realized like there's just too much need and not enough people. So I'm really, really glad that we are democratizing research. It's just, how do we ensure quality? Because research can be super dangerous. So it's worth the effort, but, having those quality checks is super important.
All right, we're definitely running out at the end of our time here. I'll turn it over to Zoe and Amanda. Any final piece of advice that you want to call out. One thing I want to say in the chat, Dante has shared a link where Amanda has written a great piece about democratization. I believe there's templates mentioned and referenced and shown in there. I know people are asking about that, and we can also share that later in this Slack group. So Zoe, Amanda, final thoughts as we wrap up.
I'd say, like, whether you're new or you've been around for a while, don't be afraid to shake it up in research democratization or otherwise. Like, let's say you're just getting in, you can point to those experts like we were talking about, like a path has been paved for you. If you've been in something for a while, you can say, like, I have this expertise now, and here's what I've learned, and here's how we can shift things. Like, wherever you are in your career, have started at a new company. And that's like such an amazing fresh slate for me to be like, oh, here's how research really works, or how have you worked with research in the past, and kind of ask those silly questions. And yeah, I do that with any folks that onboard or join any company I'm a part of. It's like an amazing opportunity to like infuse them with real research understanding of how we work. But however you kind of want to hack it together, I think whoever you are on this call, like, you have that power to change our field and to change how we're perceived. So don't be afraid to do that. Definitely step into that piece.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I think one of the big things I'm always pushing on is, so what, who cares, and what are we going to do about it? And usually with democratization, it's a great way to push forward. We've talked a lot about risk. Sometimes the risk is low. And if that so what, who cares is low, just help them kind of do it and set it up. It's okay to just say, oh, I'm not going to own that. I'm going to let it go. You do not need to own everything. Failure is going to happen. It's a necessary part of the process. It's going to move forward, and it'll help you learn. And also, when people fail with you, they learn more. So that's a win in your book. But make sure you have a sense of where you're going and what the risk of it. And don't take on anything you don't need to take on. Don't fight every battle. Please learn that from me. Amanda and I had worked on this